I'll stay sitting down. I think you've heard a lot already, so I'm not going to go over a lot of the stuff that you've heard. We've heard about how the energy transition is driving a massive jump in demand, not just for rare earths, but for critical minerals in general, and even minerals that we don't consider critical for, which I think is wrong, such as copper, and that's been mentioned already. I think we need to talk about the fact that geopolitics is really at the heart of all of this, and we've talked about strategic competition. That's absolutely right, but we need to think actually in a much more advanced way about geopolitics, not just who our enemies are, not just who our rivals are, but who our friends and allies are. And we also need to think about ways in which we can actually cooperate with our rivals, because there are ways in which that can happen too, which we will need to do at least in the short term. We've talked about our failure, and when I say our, I mean the United States, our failure to invest in critical minerals. And many people have said this, and myself included, that essentially we've been asleep at the wheel for far too long. And I'd like to actually address my comments to that question. Why is it that we've left this unattended for so long? And I think the answer comes by studying exactly how supply chain thinking here in the United States has evolved. In the era of unfettered globalization, which really began with the end of the Cold War, there was this assumption that you could always get hold of the things you need because somewhere, someone in the world was actually producing them at a lower cost than we could do it here in the United States. There was an arrogant assumption that we would always have access to those goods, even when evidence became overwhelming that we were highly vulnerable in our supply chains to certain things such as critical minerals. And we let it slide for so long. But over the years, gradually, that focus on who can do it cheapest, which is really a conversation about who has the best value for money, has evolved into a conversation about not just about value for money, but values such as national security, values such as environmental standards, social standards, governance standards, transparency, anti-corruption, geopolitics, and strategic competition. And I think we find ourselves at this point in time, at the end of 2022, in a fascinating position where here in the United States, we've finally begun to wake up that we have moved from a focus on value for money, to values in our supply chain thinking. And when we apply that to the question of rare earth elements and to critical minerals, I think we see something which is quite daunting in terms of how far behind we are, but also quite encouraging in the sense that in a relatively short period of time, essentially in the last 2 years, we've managed to generate, if not consensus, because it's always tricky to talk about that in Washington, but a general agreement that these are issues which require urgent attention. And it's not just about extraction, it's about the entire value chain. Yes, processing and refining of critical minerals, but also about, as a couple of people have already mentioned, about what happens to those refined minerals when they enter the supply chain for things like smartphones, or for wind turbines, or for purposes of national security. And I think we're seeing positive progress on a number of fronts. I don't believe we've lost the war. I think we've lost a large number of battles on the critical minerals front. But I think that there is a lot of reason to be optimistic if we do the right things. And here, what I think is most important is that we don't focus on one silver bullet, because there isn't one. As with all really important policy issues, there's not one way to approach this. In fact, we have to approach them from multiple angles. Beginning in the summer of 2021, the Wilson Center began to work intensively on supply chains. And in October of last year, we produced this report, the Mosaic Approach, which looks at how we can make the United States critical mineral supply chain more resilient. And we came up with a number of recommendations and ways in which we have to approach this issue. Yes, there is a need to extract more critical minerals here in the United States. And to do that, we need to have cooperation from obviously the mining industry. We need to have cooperation from permitting authorities, and we need to reform the permitting process here in the United States. We need to invest heavily in innovation in mining technology. We need to invest heavily in human capital because we have a severe shortage of young people who are interested and willing to go into the mining industry today. And as with every industry, if you don't have the talent, you simply can't do these things. We need to invest not just in the extraction, but in the processing, and we're beginning to see that. We need to work with communities, civil society, because there is enormous opposition to opening up a mine or opening up a refining or processing plant here in the United States. And the complex regulatory permitting process here in the United States works against our national interest, but also the highly democratic nature of the United States and the fact that we allow access to the policy process, the permitting process at multiple levels, federal, state, local, etc., which is one of the great strengths of our system. In this case, is actually one of the elements which makes it that much more complex. So we need to work with society to show why mining matters, why processing matters. And part of the message there is that there is no energy transition without mining. There is no energy transition without critical minerals. We need to work on that innovation element, not just in extraction and processing, but in general. We need to think about how batteries are made and how we can substitute cobalt for other metals, in which we're seeing significant progress at this point in time. We need to think about not just the critical minerals that we need today, but we need to think about the critical minerals that we're going to need tomorrow, because something that we don't consider important today, a scientist 5 years from now may well find a use for, and it will become fundamentally important. And perhaps most importantly for a forum such as this, the United States cannot do this alone. The United States needs to work internally, but also externally. This year, we have seen the creation of something called the Mineral Security Partnership, where the United States and friendly and allied countries are working together on the critical mineral supply chain. But thus far, there hasn't been a lot of beef in that burger, if you understand me. What we need to do now is to move forward. We need to work very closely with our allies, beginning here in North America with Canada, which has been mentioned several times, Mexico, which has been mentioned once. And although the policy climate in Mexico is not exactly helpful at this point in time, I am confident that there are ways in which we can work together as a region to secure access to many of the critical minerals that we need. Beyond North America, we are blessed that we are in the Western Hemisphere. Throughout the Southern Cone, it is a region rich in lithium, as well as many other minerals such as copper. And beyond that, we need to do a much, much better job working in Africa, working in Asia, on both extraction and processing. And I think that there is a real possibility, real potential that we can have a positive influence, not just in increasing the supply, but improving the quality of those minerals and improving the quality of the extractive and the processing process by which minerals enter the supply chain. If the United States doesn't do this and doesn't take the lead, it's difficult to see anybody else doing it. And right now, I think we're at that critical juncture whereby we've made progress, but now we need to talk a heck of a lot more to our allies and our friends to make sure that we are working with them, not against them. Many thanks.